everyone, welcome back to the How to Podcast series. I have probably one of the biggest smiles on my screen today, and I'm really super excited. Doctor is in the house. Everyone, sit up, pay attention. Dr. LJ is here. We're going to be talking podcasting, talking about her show, talking about some podcasting questions, getting ourselves out there into the world. And we have a super duper smarty pants person on the podcast today, and I am so excited. Dr. LJ, hello, how are you?
Well, I hope I show up as smart as you made me out to be.
Come on.
This would be a horrible episode to get tongue-tied on, but that's okay. I'm just going to put it to you guys. I like to keep it 100. I like to just be who I am, 100% raw. I don't come from the high horse. I come from the low horse. That been there, done that horse. Like I've been in the trenches, maybe in the trenches with a couple things right now. But yeah, I'm just loving life. I got my Be Happy shirt on. I'm bringing the smile. I'm bringing the energy. It's summer. It's not quite to 120 degrees in Scottsdale. So life is good. I'm not complaining yet. I may be a little more in monsoon season or when it's 130 degrees.
Yeah. Old Town Scottsdale was a highlight for me when I made my trip down to Arizona. I walked the streets and saw all the amazing little places and so cool. I love Arizona. So excellent.
It's the energy for me. It's the energy for me. Yes.
Amazing. Okay. Talk about your podcast. Let's promote. Let's go. Tell us about the show.
I know what's going on. So I have a podcast, the Wholistic Endo Expert. Like I was telling you, I feel like you're a pro and I'm a virgin. Like I'm kind of breaking into the podcasting. And so this is actually a really transparent moment where you feel like, do I have this? Do I not? What am I doing right? What am I doing wrong? But let me just put it this way. I have the podcast, Wholistic Endo Expert Podcast. Need to put out more episodes. Life gets in the way. But the biggest thing I think for me that like I'm proud of myself. And then on the other hand, I'm like, it holds me back is my type A personality. So as you listen to it, you'll see how I've evolved, I've pushed, I've learned. But I love my podcast. I love it. I love it. I love it. It's really my journey, my story. For anyone that's listening that may not know a little bit about me, it took me 16 years to be diagnosed with endometriosis. That was 16 years, of chasing a diagnosis, feeling like I was crazy, doctors telling me I was crazy, then my body freaking out. And then I'm hating my body. I'm hating the medical system. I'm hating all things life. And being like, I have no effing quality of life. I couldn't show up for my family. I couldn't show up and be a single parent. I couldn't show up. I had a business. Anybody can have a business, but when you can't even show up and make money, like that was my world. And so I created this podcast deeper into my journey, really just talking about what I went through, all the medical gaslighting, how I made it to the other side, endometriosis in total remission, no hysterectomy, no crazy surgeries, and like living my best life. So that's kind of what you get on the podcast. Got some episodes coming out talking all things about mold, huge on my journey. And I will just say this for anyone that's listening to this and they're like, I want to do a podcast. This is what I'm going to tell you. Talk about the stuff that you don't want to talk about. You ain't got to put all your business out there, but like the TMI, the stuff where you're like, dang it, I wish I would have did that better, did it differently. I'm telling you, that's what people want to hear. So that's why a couple of my episodes coming out. Yes, very much endometriosis and hormones, but talking about mold. I nearly lost my life to mold 2.5 years ago. Like it has been life changing, right? Your girl yanked out her breast implants about 1.5 years ago. Definitely been part of my healing journey. So that's the kind of stuff that we talk about on my podcast, like real life-ish. So we can like live better and balance our hormones and just have a good life, right? So we can be happy. That's what we're trying to do over here.
Love it. Talk about your audience. What do you know about them? What's like when you saw that information that showed up on your stats or whatever, you're like, oh, well, I didn't expect that. Tell me about your audience.
So my audience is small, but growing. The one thing I will say about my audience is everyone that's in my audience or my ideal client or people I work with, they're me. Like I can almost finish their sentences or I get a message from them and they're like, were you spying on me? And I'm like, yes, I was in that pantry. I seen you eat those peanut butter crackers when you knew you were allergic to peanut butter, but you were stressed out because that used to be me. And so that's so funny. Like it's so funny. Everyone in my audience can relate to my story, but only can they relate to my story because I had to open my mouth and put it out there, right? Like I had to tell them, this is the dumb stuff I did when I was trying to get better. This is what worked. This is what didn't. And then my audience is like, oh yeah, I can relate to all of those. Most of my podcast audience are women, or should I say someone with the vulva? I don't know, the politics, it gets so out there now. I'm just like, people that have problems that resonate with my story. I'm your girl, you're my people, period, whatever you want to call it. No offense to anyone. Mostly 25 to 35 females, go-getters, type A's. We're highly intelligent. We're very motivated. We like to do all the research, but then we get to where we're like, okay, I'm researching all night. I'm getting a couple of wins, but I'm not getting all the wins. That is my audience. And then those who love to learn. It's something about a podcast. Anybody can sit around and like buy a bunch of books, buy a bunch of magazines and be like, one day I'm going to research. But I found, and maybe, I don't know, I'll even ask you, someone that'll listen to a podcast is someone that is more apt to actually apply the knowledge, right? The book knowledge and having all the newsletters. Like, let's be honest, we probably all have emails, which around the holidays, you get all these emails, you know whose emails list you're on, but you have all these freebies, all these downloads, but do we ever use them? No.
Right.
But for people that are on a podcast, we're a little bit different breed. We're looking for solutions. We're like listening in the car, trying to buy the stuff on Amazon. Like, we want to get wins. And so it's kind of funny when you think about like, who is my audience? Those who are honestly ready to do the work, like just ready to do the work, tired of suffering, did everything in conventional medicine and really open to something new.
Amazing. So your podcast, is it solo hosted, interview, combination? Tell us.
So I started off doing a bunch of interviews, and then I was kind of like, hold it. Interviews are good, but I need to also be the star of my show, right? So I may have did a bunch of interviews. I still have some amazing interviews coming up, but what I've actually done to shift my business is I don't do as many interviews, and then I'm kind of doing more solo episodes, also missing some episodes as we were talking before. Like, my goal was every 2 weeks. I try not to beat myself up about it. As I say this out loud, I'm kind of beating myself up a little because I haven't been doing every 2 weeks because there's just been all these things going on in my other facets of my business. But what I have done is those one-on-one interviews that I used to do a lot for my podcast, I'm now having those same people and other guests come over and do an audio summit. So I'm trying to create 2 different platforms and really make my content more evergreen. I think with podcasting, it's a little easier sometimes to do interviews, but for me, I have different programs and different services. And I'm like, the only way they're going to know about them is if I honestly talk about them. So I do some interviews and maybe throw in a little commercial on the front end or the back end. I mean, I hate to say the word commercial, but some type of promotion. And then the other episodes are really solo episodes. But I will say, my solo episodes sometimes do better than my interviews. And it's like when you have these interviews and you're like, these people, they're doing all kinds of stuff. They've like published 15 books and you're like, this is going to be the best episode. And it's a good episode. But once again, people are listening to the podcast because they want to know what's going on in my world, right? Like, they've seen me on Instagram or, they've seen me, at a medical conference and they just want to make that connection with me. So I think it's been very eye-opening to know that, yes, I love to have the interviews and the big wigs and the people that are, up climbing the ladder a little higher, but they're okay with little old me. I mean, they really are okay with just hearing about my mold journey, hearing about my life, hearing about my wins, my challenges. So yeah, just a little bit of both.
Okay. How are you growing this show? How are you doing that through listenership, gaining new listeners, and social media? Talk a little bit about that.
Growing the show, I need to grow the show a little bit more, right? Okay. That's where I had some areas of opportunity. So this is one thing I'm still, to be honest, trying to figure out, like, what's the best way. And I think that's where I love social media. I love being on Instagram and all that. But on the other hand, I think that's where we start comparing ourselves. We're looking at everyone's Instagram account. They've got, I don't know what program everyone's using, but now they have the font that's like the words that are jumping up. And I'm like, I don't really love that, but I'm like, dang it, everyone's doing that. So now there's part of me where I'm like, okay, I'm releasing an episode. I'm going to I got to find out what program you're using. I need the font jumping off the page. But then I'm like, is that even who I want to be? Not really. Right. So as I'm comparing myself among everyone else, I think that's part of I'm just going to put it this way. All that energy where I'm looking at what everyone else is doing and trying to figure out how I'm going to do it. I honestly just need to put that energy into releasing some of these podcast episodes that are sitting in my Google Drive or in my Dropbox instead of trying to figure out what I need to do. I do want to increase my reach. What I really do right now is I have a tiny mailing list with my hormone coaching and all that. So I email them. It's interesting. I'd love to get your advice. I have been doing like little clips for my podcast, and for my audience, they don't really love that. Like, they maybe
Interesting.
they'll listen for 30 seconds. I get more traction doing maybe like an IG carousel. Like these are 8 things that we talked about, and they can kind of scroll like, mold will do this, mold will do that. Hey, these are 5 mistakes I made, 5 things I did to correct it. Yeah, I don't know. I'm on the fence with that one. I like the video, right? That's what I like. I don't know if it's just because I like looking at myself. I don't know what it is, but I just like video. But my audience, they're like, no, we don't want to see a 60-second clip for your podcast. They'll listen to the podcast. They'll interact in my IG stories. But as far as promoting my podcast in my newsfeed, I'm open to ideas. My people not loving what I'm doing. I do have 2 Instagram accounts as well. So I have my bigger account, which I've had for a long time. And then I created one for my podcast. And I think it's also a branding issue. Because I kind of I take the same content and put it on both. I just realized that I get different responses on both accounts. So it's kind of like, once again, do I stay up all night trying to figure out, 15 different ways to say the same thing? At the end of the day, I put my story out there. Whoever it's meant for will find it. But I definitely need to be like more proactive in getting my story out there and promoting it more. So I'm open to ideas. Hit me. I'm ready.
Okay. So the one for me, my struggle as a podcaster is I go to social media, and the people that are following my social media accounts for my podcast are generally already listening to the show. They're already subscribed and following the show. So when I release an episode, they already know. It's on their phone. So me coming on saying, hey, everyone, I got a new episode. They're like, yeah, I know.
We know.
I just listened to it. Why are you telling me this? Right. So they already know. So for me, I still feel you need to have a spot on social media. You need to be social on social media. That's my big thing. You really need to engage, interact. One thing I do, anytime somebody comes to my social media, like my Instagram for my podcast, and I get a new follower, but once a week, I go and find my most recent followers on Instagram, and I go to my DMs, and instead of typing, I hit the little record button, and I give them a voice message, because as a podcaster, that's my voice. That's me, right? And that can't be given to a VA, right? And that can't be done automatically by some bot. It has to be done by the person. And for you to leave me a voice message as a new follower to your page, you got me. Because like, who's not going to push play on that, first of all, right? And so I did it yesterday. I did 7 of them, and it took me 3 minutes. Okay, that's it, 3 minutes. And I was on and I was done. I got responses back from every single person.
Ooh, like, that's like 100% conversion.
Who does this? Who leaves me a voice message? Who does that? Right. So that really works, just to encourage people to come to your page. But what I really like is having people on my podcast, or doing commercials for other people's podcasts on my show. I want to promote, because if you're on a podcast listening, you're more apt to go to the next podcast with very little things in the way of you going to the next show, right?
Okay.
Because you're right there. If I tell you on Instagram to leave Instagram and come over here and listen to my show, that's a big ask. You're asking somebody to do something substantial to get your content. So if you're on a podcast, you can easily invite someone else to be part of your show. One thing I'm playing with is called feed drops. And what I do, feed drop.
Feed drops? Okay.
Yeah, what I do is I find somebody in my area, my niche, my niche, what I'm doing, and I really love their content. I reach out to them, and some people think that's competition. What I do is I reach out to them and say, hey, can I have one of your complete episodes? Like everything from beginning to end, one of your shows. I'm going to bring it over to my podcast, and I'm going to drop it into my feed, and I'm going to do a new intro and a new outro to tell my audience about this, but I want to play your episode on my show. What do you think of that? And then I would love to do that for you as well. Let's do this work together. So my show goes on your show comes on my show.
Ooh,
your audience
I like
hears
that.
about me, and my audience hears about you. We work together. And then how about we interview each other and talk about each other's show? There's 3 or 4 episodes you've just created by one ask with someone.
Content.
So I know you have great content, great contacts in what you do. I am sure there's people popping into your mind right now. You're like, oh, this person would be perfect for my audience, right? They
That's
just
a
reach
great
out.
idea.
They just send you the file, you grab it, And for those days when you just can't get the podcast out and you're like, oh, I wish I could get my episode out. Reach out to your friends and bring one of their episodes in and you're fine. You have new
That's
content
actually a
all the
really good
time
idea.
and you don't have to worry, right? And you're going to build community. You've
Mhm.
gained listenership and you supported somebody in your space that you want to do life with or work with.
Dropping gems. I love it. I want to go back to the voice message. So it's so funny you say that. I think this is why sometimes like the iron sharpens iron. I'm like, we just got to like get to talking about it. And I'm like, it all comes together. So I have a class coming out tomorrow and it's a free webinar. It's on Eventbrite. I've been promoting it, but I have every time someone follows my account, I'm like, hey, Susie Q, just want to make sure you have the link. And I've gotten such a great response versus just like sending in the link that says, hey, would love to have you. And they're like, okay, yeah, whatever. But I never ever thought about doing that with my podcast, which is like, okay, now after my Thursday promo, I mean, I do have another class coming out next Thursday, but in between there, I need to start doing that. That's actually a really great idea. That
See?
never done. And I'm like, something about your voice too. And I also love, I'm
Right.
like, so many different things you said. And I also love the fact that you're like, asking them to leave one platform. And this is so funny. I've heard this before, right? I don't know why. It's just that reminder. Asking them to leave one platform and go somewhere else, there's more resistance. Asking them to do something that they're already doing, it's a little bit easier. So yeah, I need to keep that in mind. Yeah. And I think for me, most of my marketing is on Instagram. I mean, maybe I'm on TikTok, but it's been a good minute. You know, I've got my podcast, I do conferences and all that, but I spend a lot of time on IG. So being able to like cross market for podcasts, I think is going to be probably a better idea for me. Cause like you said, they're already listening. And I feel like just anyone that listens to a podcast, I don't want to say more educated, but just more apt to take the tools that they learn and put them into action.
Right. And so when I look to my Instagram,
Mhm.
because most of the people that are, in general terms, most of the people on my Instagram following my show are listening to my show. That's a
Right.
basic statement. I ask them to use my content on Instagram to share the show to their family and friends. So it becomes a library of content that my followers can then say, go check out this show. I really love it. Here's the stuff they're doing, and they can share it. So it's not really
Mm-hmm.
like I'm creating content for my listeners because my podcast is my content for my
Mm-hmm.
listeners. The social media assets are there to be shared. So I'm giving them the tools to promote the show because they love the show.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not really speaking to the new listener who has never heard my show because they're probably not following me on my Instagram account for my
Mm-hmm.
podcast. So as they become listeners, they come into the community, they start following, and then I just use Instagram in that way. So that's kind of the way I'm playing with right now. Seems to be working because then my audience grabs that content and shares it out with their friends. And it's kind of a starting point to build my community.
That's actually, those are great ideas. Things I never thought of. The voice messages, I'm doing that, but in a different facet in my business. So I'm like, oh, okay. For Thursday night, after I transition and drop that event, I'll start doing the messages because I am definitely going to release this new podcast. It's going to happen this weekend. Hell or high water, it is going to happen. I'm going to get that episode out there and then I will send the voice messages. That's a great idea.
So let's talk about the frequency of that happening. When's the last time somebody sent you a voice message on Instagram?
Voice message. You know, I don't. Well, I have a lot of people in pain. They're like, "Help me, help me." I get those messages. I'm in pain right now. What do I do? But it's interesting. Probably about a month ago, I had someone send me a message. I sent her a voice message and she replied and she was like, "Oh my gosh." She's like, "I knew you were high energy, but she's like, the fact that I heard your voice, we booked a collaboration call." I have to be honest. I didn't think, I mean, it was just, I think it's that extra effort, especially when you have a larger account because anyone can double
Yeah.
tap and be like, oh, emoji, oh, hearted. But it's like when I stop and I'm like, hey, thanks for whatever. That's true. It is the extra effort. And I tend to probably, I respond to all the DMs I get. I do get probably 300 to 400 a day. So it makes it a little more challenging. But the ones with the voice, there's just more of a connection. It's kind of like my event tomorrow. It's going to be on Eventbrite. It's always easier to answer questions when they're right there on Zoom and they're like, hey, this is what I'm going through versus when I'm in the chat and I'm like, okay, your cycle's been gone for 15 days and I'm like trying to read and I'm trying to like put it all together. There's so much more when I can hear their voice because I can pick up other things just by the inflections of their voice, the lack of energy. the discouragement, like all that other emotional stuff I can pick up in the voice. So
Awesome.
once again, it's just a great reminder, right? We got to use the
Yeah.
power of our voice, AKA the podcast itself.
Right.
is
Okay.
our
The
voice.
other thing we chatted about before we hit record was YouTube and
Yes.
leveraging YouTube to support your podcast, to send people back to the audio podcast.
Mhm.
YouTube is really big into podcasting right now. It's not the traditional definition of a podcast. And some people listening are like, oh, don't say YouTube. It works, though. That's the thing. It's very searchable. People can come to YouTube and they can type in
Mhm.
the subject matter of your podcast episode and find you. So really simply, it's just taking all of your podcasts, uploading them to YouTube, even if they're just an image with the audio
Mhm.
attached. They don't have to be video to qualify.
Oh, okay.
Just an image with the audio, really simple.
Okay.
That's very simple to do. You put it up, you create a playlist, and then you convert the playlist into a podcast. And then YouTube
Oh.
is promoting these as new podcasts, and they're
I need to
behind
get
it,
on that.
pushing it out. So it's a really nice way to bring people in, because what people are doing now on YouTube, people tend to be hitting play on a podcast on YouTube and setting their phone down. They're not necessarily watching, but they have it
Mhm.
on in the background. And then that's how YouTube is kind of growing podcasting. So I suggest it for everyone because it's
Mhm.
very low effort to do
Yeah.
this. It's one more step, I get it, but the ability to be found is a little
Mhm.
easier there than, say, Apple or Google or Audible, wherever you are. YouTube is really good as a search engine. So if you can
That's it.
answer the question,
Right.
how do I this, or how, like answer the question as if somebody's
Mhm.
going to Google saying, how do I blah, blah, blah. Put that as your title of your episode, because when people go to Google and type that, ding, guess what's going to happen? YouTube is going to
Mm.
show up right there, and you're going to
Kind
lead
of like
people right to you.
Pinterest, how
Mhm.
they're like more SEO. Okay, that
Right.
makes sense. Yeah. Well, it's added to my to-do list. We'll see if I get it done this weekend. It sounds amazing, but I'm like, I just got to get the episode out. It's been a month. Like, I'm feeling
Right.
bad. People are like, did you release an episode and I didn't get it? And I'm like, no, it's not been released yet. You haven't missed anything. I'm still over here editing it like I told you, I edited for 30 minutes yesterday. No, I made 8 changes. I was there for 30 minutes and I was like, okay, hold it. Took me 30 minutes to go through 8 minutes. That's right. And I was
Wow.
like, this, what am I doing? But I was wanting to take out any pause. Like I was just trying to like chop it up. And I was like, okay, this is ridiculous. Like I'm going to do a little more editing today to make sure it flows and there's not any like discombobulated or misinformation. And then I'm like, I got to just hit enter. And that's, to be honest, that is the reason I didn't start my podcast. Cause I was like, I don't know what to do. I don't know what mic to do. What do I say? I don't know about the music, the graphics. And then once I got started and I had such an overwhelming response, I was like, I should have did this years ago. And it's still by no means exactly where I want it to be. There's definitely areas of opportunity. But when I get the emails, I get the messages and people are like, oh my God, like I did the same thing with the endo diet. And I'm like, I've known this for 8 years. I don't know why I
Right.
was waiting to tell people. But
Yeah.
I think once again, for me, because I spend a lot of time on social media, it becomes the comparison of, like I said, the videos where the words are jumping out with the bubbles and all that. And I'm like, what app am I, and I'm like, that, I don't even like that.
Hmm.
Why would I? But then I'm like, does my audience like it? Do they want the words jumping off? Like I said, my audience, they don't really care to see the little clips. So I have to do carousels and different things. But yeah, I think it's also, so this is a good question I have. And I don't know. Yeah. So I have my website for my business and then I grabbed the domain for my podcast, but I never started it. So I think that was another, I know. I was like, I need to probably just go. I think I got the holisticendoexpert.com or something or .org, and I've just never used it because once again, it was like another thing I had to do. But I think as far as my reach, I need to kind of find how to merge those. And even I'm rebranding my business as well. So I think I'm going to have to rebrand and shift it into that as well.
So is that website address the new one? Is that just a dead link? It doesn't go anywhere?
Well, it's not dead. I paid for it for a
Yeah.
year. It's waiting to be alive.
Because you can just redirect it to your current website so you can use it. And
I
then
think
once
that's what I
you
need to do.
yeah, and then once
Yeah,
you build
I
the
paid for
website,
it.
just move it over to wherever you're going to be after.
I just never used. Yeah,
Yeah.
I knew I needed to grab it. It was like, okay, if I'm starting a podcast, I need to grab it. I trademarked it. I did all that, but I've never used it. I honestly just thought about it probably 2 weeks ago. I was traveling and I think I got a invoice saying, hey, we're renewing for another year. And I'm like, oh yeah.
That's right. That's right.
Oh my gosh. Another resource
Amazing.
we're paying for that we're not using. Great.
I love it.
Yeah, that's me.
Hmm. Anything else that you're kind of struggling through with your podcast that I maybe can help with, or I'd
What
love
else is
chatting
going
about
on with
this.
my podcast? I need to activate that link. I'd like to increase my reach. I think another thing with my podcast, because I do offer a service, is I never want my podcast to be super salesy. So it's finding ways to promote my services, yet provide value. And I never want the promotion of my services to outrank and just like dismiss the whole value that I'm bringing to the table.
Good. So instead of saying, hey, everyone, come buy my product, you
Right.
could say, I was speaking with a client this week and we talked about this.
Mm-hmm.
So as a listener, what you just told me is you have clients.
Mm-hmm.
So, okay, now I'm interested, right? You weren't selling me anything. You were helping me, and you were talking about something where you've helped someone else. So there's proof there that
Mm-hmm.
I can know, like, and trust you,
Mm-hmm.
and that I can be one of your clients. So now I'm already ready, my credit card in hand, saying, where do I go?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it's just naturally baked into your conversation because it's who you are. You're here to help people. And, we don't want to be salesy, but at the same time, you have a gift and you're helping people. And for you to hold that back from people is almost just as bad as being overtly salesy, right? You have a gift for people. So we really need to promote that. And so you can help more people. So people need to know that you are available to help them.
Mm-hmm.
And that can come across by, again, leaving voice messages for people, putting out great content, being consistent where you can,
Mm-hmm.
communicating with others in your space, and building relationships with like-minded other podcasts. All of that combined together, and then just simply saying, here's how I help people, here's an illustration.
Mm-hmm.
That to me as a listener says, I can trust you and I'm in the right space.
Another great reminder, all the stuff I do on Instagram, the storytelling, I just need to bring the storytelling over to my podcast.
Right.
Yeah. And that's true. Cause people want to know the wins, right? Anyone, you could have a package for $5 or 5,000, but they just want to know, is anyone winning? Is anyone getting results? So yeah, I will do that. I mean, yeah, I will definitely do that on my next episode. Cause I was like, I need to talk a little bit about my mini package, but I hate the ones when I'm listening, especially when it comes to like holistic health and they're talking about health. And then all of a sudden they're like, here's an ad by AutoZone. And I'm like, what does AutoZone have to, I'm so confused. Like you had me on the holistic healing journey and now you're talking about my Tahoe needs an oil change. And I'm like, I'm just so confused. So I'm like, I like them to be, like cohesive. But then it also like shifts my brain to where I'm like, oh my gosh, like I love sponsors, but I'm like, this doesn't have anything to do with anything. And then I feel like I'm trying to be sold. And then they come back with the nuggets and the gyms. And I'm still thinking about, sponsored by AutoZone and I'm not able to like come back in. So for me, I'm like, my stuff's not AutoZone and just random stuff. And that's just the one podcast. I love it, but she has the most random sponsors. I can never figure it out. I mean, God bless her. She has sponsors, but I'm like, what is Auto? Maybe they're just paying well. So then I'm like, even the more like, I want to promote my stuff, but I don't want it to be salesy. And the know, like, and trust and the storytelling. You know what? This is a great reminder that all these skills I have are transferable. I've just to silo them. I've siloed. This is what I do here. This is what I do there. And then my podcast, I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do. And it's like, wake up and just use those skills that you have other places and dump them into the podcast. I love it.
And people love behind the scenes. So for your Instagram page, for your podcast, take them on the journey. Today I'm recording, headphones on, microphone set up. I'm recording. They see you recording your episode, and it's like they get a little behind the scenes of the process of creating it. Or you're just editing. How boring is that? But the people who don't know what editing is, they're like, oh, I got to see her do the edit. Oh, I feel like I'm part of the community, right? Take them behind the curtain and show them the process. Bring them apart, let them see you grow. And that'll also build your audience as well.
That's a good idea. Yeah. We're nosy. We like to know what's going on. We don't want to just see the perfectly aesthetic. We're like, what's really going on? I think we got a lot of that during the scamdemic, right? Everyone was going on these amazing vacations and all of a sudden they're in their kitchen with a crock pot and you're like, oh, they're a real person. They don't have a chef that cooks all their meals, or maybe they did, but now they have to learn how to cook. Like we were like, we're in the same boat. So that makes sense. Yeah.
Nice. And then back to your comment about editing. People love you. if they met you at a conference and you're speaking on stage and you come down off stage and you talk to your community, you're the same person that you were on stage. You're the same person they want to hear in the podcast. So right now, you and I, we haven't edited anything we've said so far. No one's cut out anything. We're just two people having a conversation, and people love that because sure, that's the real you. So what I find difficult is when you have somebody who puts on a persona, and they change their voice and they act differently than they are in public, and then you meet them for the first time. You're like, I've been listening to you for years.
Right.
You don't even sound like yourself.
Who is this?
Who is this person? Right. So I think we get caught up in some of the editing side, and we want to put our best stuff out there. I get that. But also people want the real us. Right. They really like that. So again, so it's kind of and then I understand you want to put your best foot out there, but at the same time, it's okay to let some stuff slide.
Right. No, this is so true. I get it all the time. It's so funny you say that because it almost makes me think of, once again, I refer to Instagram filters. And so it's interesting. People will get on coaching calls with me or discovery calls, and they always like look in the camera and they're like, oh, you look just like your profile photo. And I'm like, who else would I look like? But I'm like, oh yeah, there are so many filters out there. Like, or they meet me in real life and they're like, you look just like you do on Instagram. And I'm like, well, yeah, because that's me. Like, if my face is breaking out that day, it's just breaking out that day. Like, you just get who I am. If I have a bra on, great. If I don't, well, I do my best I can. But, sometimes it's just raw. I need to answer a question. So I think that's true. People appreciate that you're real. You're not over filtered. Okay. I'm going to do my best to remember all of this when I start editing this podcast that I'm dropping about mold and breast implant illness. And I will not be editing for 5 hours because that is not going to do me any good. And I could be using that time to just put it out there and then be sending those voicemails and making meaningful connections and grabbing some episodes from other people and making sure I have an episode out every 2 weeks.
There you go. So I hope this didn't feel like a dump fest of getting all these new tasks that you now have to do. I appreciate the conversation, and you're a very busy person, and I totally thank you for making time to be here on How to Podcast series. If there's anything in the future I can help you with, I got my hand up. I'd love to help you any way I can. But again, let's remind people of where we're going to go to hear the best podcast in the world. Next to mine. No, I mean, more than mine.
Right. The second best.
Come on. Okay. Where do we go? What do we do? The website. Give us the whole thing.
Yes. So if you're looking for the second best podcast, I'll go ahead and take second place. I'm okay with being second for some things. I am the Holistic Endo Expert podcast. We'll obviously be, as we talked about, getting that link out there. So one day you'll just type in the Holistic Endo Expert and go to my website, go to my podcast. But right now, my main website is LJ's Powerhouse. Over on Instagram, I talked a lot about it because your girl spends a lot of time over on Insta. It is LJS_Powerhouse. I'm sure we'll have all the links, all the stuff. Yes, I talk about women's health and functional medicine and hormones, all the unsexy stuff, womb wellness stuff. But just overall, if you want to live a better life, balance your hormones, have more energy, be more successful, or maybe you just find me entertaining and you want a good laugh as I struggle through trying to figure all these things out, come on over and let's learn and hang out.
Amazing. And yes, we will have all the information in the show notes. Please go there and you will have everything you need to connect with the good doctor. Thank you so much for being part of the podcast. Great to have you here.
Thanks.
Awesome.